All right. All right. What's going on, everybody? Here we are, Friday, January 24th. How's everyone doing here? Friday, January 24th. We are rolling with today's YouTube Live. I hope everyone has been having a good week, a good month. January. Hope everyone is feeling the energetic shifts that have been taking place this month here in January as we've moved out of 2024, 2025. If you are so blessing this live with your presence, I would love to hear from you guys in the chat section. If you are here dropping in this live, I would love to hear from you guys in the chat section. Let me know that you're here. Let me know how you are doing. Let me know what is true and alive inside of you. Here, as we move into today's live, which we're going to be talking about entities, dark energy, ultimately just ascension. We're going to be talking about the ascension process. So I'd love to know if you are watching this live, where you're at sort of in this process. What's been happening? Have you been feeling spiritual attacks? Have you been feeling dark energy trying to pull you into the dark realm? Or are you feeling totally in the light and feeling totally unaffected, feeling totally just moving into sort of this higher dimensional plane and you're able to hold it? Where are you at in your process, everyone? Let me know. I would love to know before I sort of start to riff here. And we're going to see where this goes. We're going to see where we go today. We're going to talk about entities, dark energy, and ascension. So before I sort of drop in here, just if you guys want to let me know your name and how you are doing. Look at this hair. It's a little coiffed up, huh? All right. Since we're feeling a little bit shy here, as if I need more caffeine, get a little sugar-free Red Bull just to fucking start the engine. Let's go, baby. Okay, so first off, maybe let's just start with this, that this is my interpretation, and I did this in a video where I basically talked about what at least my belief is, and there's a lot of different spiritual teachers who might talk about different things, but my belief about what dark energy is, what an entity is a really, really powerful spiritual being, a powerful being or a powerful person, right? But the difference is, and the example that I used in my video that I posted was Vecna. I don't know if you guys are fans or have heard or have watched the show Stranger Things on Netflix, but Vecna is a prime example. It's a really good example in storytelling and in show and movie making of what an entity is. Whereas 11 from the show would be more of the angel or the knight, or the saint that was moving into more of a light vibration, where Vecna went into the dark. And so the entity is a powerful person or a powerful being, someone with a lot of spiritual gifts, someone with these really, really powerful spiritual gifts who is not able to integrate the trauma, someone who's not able to integrate their pain and their suffering, someone who's not able to integrate the pain and the suffering. So rather than moving through the vibration of the divine by integrating and healing that trauma or that origin of pain, that person lives from a projection of that pain. So the entity or the dark energy lives from a projection of that pain. Meaning when they start to come up to that pain, they start to come up to that sort of unworthiness, like, whew, that's really, really heavy. And so they start to come up to that pain, they start to come up to that unworthiness, and then they move into some sort of inflation or some sort of projection from that place. So what actually happens with the entity is their power is actually being sourced by their trauma. With the entity or the dark energy, their power is actually being sourced from their trauma continuing to exist. Because if we think about trauma, really what we want to think about is we want to think about energy that is unable to move. Energy that is unable to move. If we want to look at trauma from an energetic standpoint, we're basically looking at energy that is unable to move. So when we think about a dark energy being or sort of an entity, we're thinking about the origin that is being born from an accumulation and generations and lifetimes worth of stuck energy. And so that energy is unable to move. It's in stagnation, it's frozen over, it's there, it's rotting, it's not able to move. And so now the power that we bring into the world is from all that energy that is holding. It's almost like I get the image of think about this energy is sort of swirling, but it's stuck, right? It's swirling, but it's stuck. It's like swirling, but it's stuck. It's really unable to move, right? So what happens when we heal trauma, when we heal karma from the ancestors, all of a sudden all that swirling sort of fucking energy is able to move, and things are able to sort of begin to find their right place. They're able to slot into the connection points that they need to move. Maybe we could look at it that energy has an entry point and energy has an exit point. But when there's a lot of unhealed trauma and we come from a really, really dark trauma origin, the energy's stuck, the energy's swirling, right? And so now, if there's a lot of energy that's been built up and the energy that doesn't have a place to move, now what happens is our spiritual power can begin to come from the trauma. Now, the spiritual power is sourced from the trauma. The difference between a light being and a dark being, in a light being, the spiritual power is from integrated trauma. In a dark being, the power comes from unhealed trauma. It comes from stuck energy. In a light being, the power, the spiritual deliverance comes from the ability to allow that energy to move. And now that trauma has been healed, and so now that energy is able to move. It flows through your body. Everywhere in your body sort of has a cellular place. Everywhere in your body is sort of slotted into its rightful order. But in a dark being, there's this scarred over tissue with a lot of energy. So when we think of an entity, we want to think of a lot of energy that is stuck. A lot of energy that is stuck in darkness. So what happens with these dark beings and these dark sort of entities or human beings? And if you want to look at a human being that is an entity, if we want to look at it more of a human being, what it really means is someone who's spiritually powerful but is stuck in their shadow. Someone who's spiritually powerful but is stuck in their shadow. And really, really what that means is that their identity has been birthed and created from pain. What it means with an entity is their identity has been orchestrated, and the origin of their identity is so ingrained in pain. And what happens, they feel if they let go of this pain that's been living for centuries and generations through their body. And it's right here, all this energy is swirling. And if they let go of this energy, if they let go of the pain body, who the fuck will they be? If they heal their trauma, who will they be? They feel they will no longer have an identity. So what happens now is that pain and that trauma is the default place. It's the place we know. It's the safe place. And so what happens is that we hold on to that pain. The entity or the dark energy holds on to that pain. It holds on to it and it creates an identity. And if we're to integrate the pain and move into deliverance or move into ascension, and it would move into ascension, it doesn't feel that it would have any value. It doesn't feel like it would be anyone. More importantly, and most importantly, the entity or the dark energy feels that without their trauma, that if they actually go and heal their trauma, what actually now happens is they lose their power. The entity feels like if they heal their trauma, they lose their power. The entity feels like if they actually heal their trauma and all that stuck energy is actually able to move, that they're no longer be powerful. Whatever sort of gifts they might feel that they have, they feel that they will dissipate, scatter to the corners like cockroaches. It's that idea that if they move into the light, if they move more into sort of a light vibration, then they'll no longer be powerful. So what happens with entities who are enthralled in a pain body, who are enthralled in whatever they have to do to keep the identity of the pain in place, to keep the trauma in place. That's why when they feel the illumination of light, when they feel you ascending, what it's doing is it's revealing more uncomfortability, more trauma, more unworthiness. It's illuminating more of the darkness inside of them, which is why they try to pull you down, which is why they try to pull you back into the pain body and the pain cycles. Because if you actually move into that vibration, you illuminate and reveal everything inside of them. And you illuminate and you reveal everything inside of them, and now they no longer feel powerful. What really happens here with entities is entities are born and they're birthed from really, really dark trauma that's been passed down. And here's the big thing, you guys, of what happens is sometimes the trauma is too much to bear. Sometimes our trauma is too much to bear. The hard truth is that some people in this lifetime, they begin to scratch up to their trauma and it's just too much. Maybe it's not their soul's evolution to heal this trauma, but it's too much. It's too overwhelming for their body, their system. Maybe the generations that have been passed down, they can't go there. It's too much. It's too much. And so they scratch up to it and they have to hold on to it. And now their identity gets infused and it gets born with pain. But what's really, really important here, one reason why we hold on to pain is because we're not ready to let go of the past. And so if you think about a dark energy and a dark entity, what's happening if they were actually to move into more of a light vibration, then it would actually have to reveal the pain of the past. The dark energy and the dark entity, if they were to actually move into out of the pain body, it would actually require them, at least maybe they anticipate, to move into a space of forgiveness. Maybe they come from abuse. Maybe they come from molestation, or maybe they come from pain, or maybe they come from ridicule, or maybe they come from neglect, deep neglect. And moving out of the pain body, the anticipation is now we have to let go of the past. Because ultimately, to move into our power, to move into more of a light vibration of ascension, it requires us to descend and to move into some type of peace with our past. The way that you move into peace with your past is you experience your power in the present. The way that you come to peace with your past is you experience the full volume and totality of your power in the present. And as you experience the full totality and power in the present, now your relationship to the past begins to change. The past now has context that it brought you to this place. So what's happening with these entities and this dark energy Your light vibration illuminates the past that they can't let go of. It illuminates the anger that they're holding on to, the deep rotting resentment that lives in their body. And they can't let go of it. If they were moving to a light vibration, what actually were to happen is they would have to feel what they've been trying to not feel. So, dark energy and entities live in a power of shadow that is infused by stuck energy and trauma, and their patterns of their powers are predicated and infused off the fact they don't have to feel the origin of the trauma. They don't have to feel the origin of the trauma. Because what happens if you move more into the light, if you begin to ascend, really what it means is that you are moving into some element of forgiveness with your past, forgiveness of yourself, forgiveness potentially of other people from your past. You're now moving into a space of beginning to have a certain amount of peace with what you're leaving behind, with what you're letting go of, because only then can you begin to create something that is of a different sort of origin, that is of a different sort of vibration, right? We're either creating or we're recreating. And so the entity holds on to the stories for dear life. And it's like this stuck energy in this trauma, and their spiritual powers is spearheaded from that unhealed trauma. Their power is spearheaded from that unhealed trauma. And as you ascend, as you move into sort of a light vibration, what's happening is you are revealing the origin of their trauma. And so what happens is the dark energy becomes addicted to karma. The dark energy becomes addicted to karma. So what's happening is you're going to notice a lot of dark energy trying to get into your space when you are really trying to work out karma. When you're really trying to work out karma. When there's karma that's really trying to be worked out in your space, you're going to notice the entities begin to come around. The dark energy is like, whoo, whoo, as you're beginning to move that karma. So think about in your life, when you're in a space where a lot of karma is coming, ultimately, what is karma, you guys? Karma is a lot of energy. Karma is a lot of energy. Karma is a lot of energy that we're trying to work out. Karma is a lot of energy that we're trying to heal. Karma can both be negative and positive. Karma is just energy. It's energy that's trying to be transmuted and figured out, right? And so the entities are addicted to karma. They become leeches and vampires for energy. They can smell it out, they can feel it out. And they're particularly fearful of energy that is ascending. Dark energy is particularly fearful of energy that is ascending. And so, what's going to happen is entities really, really prey when you're trying to work out shadow. When you're trying to work out dark energy in your space, the entities, they come. They come. When you're trying to work out your shadow and dark energy in your space, the entities pry around you like a wolf that's eating carcasses or a vulture that's eating carcasses. And so always what happens is the entities prey when we're at our most vulnerable. What you'll notice is entities come when you're about to jump a timeline. When you're about to jump a timeline, it's kind of like you're here, and then the entities are underneath that space in the middle. And right as you're making that big leap and that big step, that's where the entities try to pull you down. Because what's happening is you're between worlds and you're between dimensions and you're between timelines. That's where ultimately what happens is the dark energy tests you. That's where you get spiritual attacks. You're working out karma. Energy is trying to find its way. This is why, particularly, the entities in the dark energy prey on you when you're asleep. Dark energy and entities, the number one way that they will spiritually attack you is in your dreams. When you're trying to work out dark energy, because in our dreams is when the spirit realm and the psychic realm and the veil between the human realm and the psychic and spirit realm is at its most thin. We're vulnerable. We're susceptible, right? And so in our dreams is a place where we're trying to work out a lot of karma. So as you notice, as you're integrating or you're processing something or you're between dimensions and realms, your dreams are fucking crazy. Your dreams are crazy. You're working something out. The dark energy preys on you because the dark energy can tell you're in what I would call a twilight zone. A twilight zone means that you're between realms of consciousness. You're between one realm and the other realm. The new realm hasn't integrated yet. The new realm has not integrated yet. And so the entities in the dark energy can feel that you're between realms of consciousness. You're not yet integrated and grounded and anchored in one realm of consciousness. You're stuck in between. And that is where the dark energy and the entities will try and prey on us. Think about when you're between realms of consciousness, just what happens internally for you. Think about what happens internally for you when you're in between realms of consciousness. You move into a compression, you move into a contraction. All this fear starts to come up. You feel really, really dysregulated in your nervous system. You feel really contracted. Doubt begins to seep into your space. All these different things that happen. When you're between realms of consciousness and you're in a twilight zone, this is when you move into a compression, you move into a dysregulation. What do you think happens with the dark energy and the entities when we're in this space? They feel it and they come towards it because what they can tell is we're vulnerable, we're susceptible. So you have to understand that we're going to be tried to be lured deeper into karma, deeper into darkness, deeper into shadow when we're at our most vulnerable, when we're in an internal compression, when we're moving through a lot of fear, when we're about to take a leap. When you're about to take a big leap in your life, you're like, I'm about to step forward. I'm about to move into something, a place that I've never been before. And you're about to take that big step. You're about to take that big step. And as you're about to take that big leap, it's when the energy feels and they try to pull you back in. What's happening is they're trying to pull you back into a certain way of relating. Dysregulation preys off dysregulation. Shadow preys off of shadow. Fear preys off of fear. Think about what happens with dark energy and entity when you begin to embody the higher vibration of source. Think about when you're communicating with a dark energetic being and you're beginning to embody the highest frequency of source. And you're commanding the highest frequency of source. You're not being pulled into this shadow way of relating. Now the entity, they lose power over you because the divine is getting stronger in you. And you say, I'm not going to be pulled into that way of relating. So the entity and the dark energy and the shadow beings, they want to pull us into dark ways of relating. And as we're about to ascend and move into a higher vibration that's more connected to the higher self, we are going to feel more dark energy. We're going to feel dark energy trying to prey on us because we're ascending and we're moving into a higher evolution of consciousness, and it illuminates their darkness, their own dysfunction, their own sort of shadow forms of relating. If you want to think of dark energy and entities, it's a way of relating. It's a vibration of relating that is predicated off trauma keeping stuck. And when you really move and you totally command source and the divine in your body and being, when you totally command source and the divine in your body and being, now the divine is repelled. Or sorry, now the dark energy and the entities are repelled. They don't have any they don't have any power anymore. They feel, the light is getting really, really strong. So what happens is your aura and your energetic field gets stronger and stronger, right? So you want to think of dark energy and entities prey on us when our energetic boundaries are the weakest. Dark energy and entities prey off weak energetic boundaries, right? And so what happens is the divine gets stronger in your space. As the divine gets stronger in your space, your aura and your energetic field gets too strong, right? And that's why you'll notice as you really begin to integrate new paradigms of consciousness on the path of ascension, the entities don't fuck with you. The entities don't fuck with you. When you really integrate the light and the divine and sort of this Christ consciousness, and you feel really rooted and anchored, the divine energies nowhere to be found. But then when you feel a little bit fragile, when you feel a little bit vulnerable, maybe when you're going through a really, really big up level, or you're taking a big leap, or there's a big shift, right? Or you're working through some really, really big trauma of your own, you might notice the entities in the dark energy come into your space a little bit more. So it's almost like the dark energy and entities are wolves or vultures that feed off of karma and unhealed trauma, right? And so when you heal your deepest karma and trauma, all of a sudden you move into a totally different paradigm, vibration, and frequency that no longer, like, do you guys notice how sometimes you make an up level in your life and all of a sudden you're like, I don't think this person's going to message me. Or it's almost like people fall out of your orbit, or people just probably at some deep unconscious level, they're either repelled by your frequency, or it just feels like it doesn't feel like a match. They feel resistance to your energy, even if you're moving into more of like a very powerful state. Just the frequency therein, it's repelled. Like your energies just no longer match together. And so what happens with dark energy and entities, as you move more into commanding the divine and you heal more of your karma and you heal more of like that trauma that has kept you stuck, the dark energy just falls away. It just falls away. And now your aura and your orbit gets really, really powerful. Too powerful for an entity to pervade. So the dark energy and the entities, they prey off weak energetic boundaries. So the biggest thing when it comes to entities and dark energy is going to be the strength of our energetic aura, our energetic orbit, and our energetic boundaries, right? And so if you think about it in those terms, energetic boundaries, when we're really entangled with our own sort of trauma bonding and trauma relating, shadow relating, and karma, it means that we're really going to be in a vibration that's really going to draw entities towards us. We're really going to draw dark energy towards us because we're really, really engaging in a frequency that we're trying to work out all this karma. We're really entangled with a lot of karma. And that is the frequency that entities and shadow beings are drawn to. They're drawn to karma and this unhealed trauma like vultures and wolves, right? And the reason being is because entities and dark beings, either their trauma is too overwhelming or it's too painful. They're not ready to heal it, or they're not ready to look at it, or maybe that's not their soul's evolution in this lifetime. But whatever it is, they're not able to turn towards the tenderness underneath the wound of the trauma. And so they pray and predicate in patterns and ways of relating that don't require them to have to heal themselves. They pray and predicate in patterns that don't require their ownership and accountability, right? So if you want to think entities and dark energy, the best way to explain it is victims that have become the abuser. Dark energy and shadow beings are victims that have now become the abuser, and they might not even know that they are the abuser. But in some level, they are living in some form of living in a victim, because when we live in a victim consciousness and we have really strong trauma, a lot of dark energy in that victim consciousness, what will happen is we will move into some form of abuse where we will now recreate the patterns in which we were a victim of. So dark energy and entities are victims. They're victims who are living through victim consciousness with really dark, deep trauma that probably runs for generations and generations, right? It's the whole thing. What happens with really dark trauma? Some people move more into like really being empowered and being a really light being, whereas some people really move more into the dark. But when we think about spiritual power, it's energy. Spiritual power is all about energy, your access to energy and your attunement and your skill to move energy and use energy, right? And so what happens with shadow beings and light beings is all that energy is wrapped up in unhealed karma and trauma. And so dark energy and entities often, very often, won't even know that they're an entity, right? So a dark energy and an entity, if you think about like a villain in a movie or a show, they don't know they're the villain, right? They are living through a form of their consciousness that they think that actually what they're doing is saving the world, or it's like the example that was coming to my head is like you think of the Riddler. If you think of like the Riddler and Batman, right? The Riddler and Batman is a prime example of dark and light, right? Batman, because the Riddler and Batman, both their parents died when they were really, really young, right? And so the Riddler became an entity. The Riddler became a shadow being. Batman became, well, Batman's still dark and holds all this trauma. He started to use that power for good, whereas the Riddler started to use that power for evil. So that's like if you think of any movie in Hollywood based off good and evil, it all comes from an origin of trauma and an origin of how we use that trauma. And so light beings or children of God, we use that trauma and we integrate that trauma to move more into a light vibration, to ascend into a higher dimension, to move into light, to move into good, to empower ourselves and empower others. Where the entity, for whatever reason, one form or another, chose evil. Again, maybe the trauma was too much, right? And so evil lives in victim consciousness, but it's where the victim becomes the abuser. And so the entities and the dark beings probably don't even know that they're entities. For example, what you might actually even notice with an entity is that maybe an entity or someone who you see as an entity, they energetically invade your space and they won't even know that they're doing it. Because what's happening is the blind spots, the unhealed consciousness inside of the dark being, the shadow figure, the human being who has not healed their trauma, is now moving into a space of coercion or manipulation or ego or hooking into you. So entities hook into you. They hook into you and they're trying to take something from you. And maybe that entity, the fear, the origin is that they were abandoned when they were really young. The example of Batman and the Riddler is that both Batman and the Riddler lost their parents, right? And so if we look at that, that's fear of abandon. Everyone you love will leave you. So what's going to happen when you have a trauma origin of everyone you love will leave you is that you're going to do whatever you can to make sure that no one leaves you, right? And the way that an entity or a dark being is in the subconscious and the unconscious, in the blind spot, in the unhealed part of the body of the entity, they will hook into you. They won't even know they're hooking into you. Again, because the entity hasn't healed the origin of their trauma. So their power is a projection or an inflation from unhealed trauma, right? So the dark energy or the entity being will hook into you and you'll be like, like this person is energetically invading my space. So entities, what happens is they usually manipulate, they coerce, and they try to control and manipulate in the psychic field, right? In the unconscious realm. Meaning they're like, "What? I'm not doing anything," but you can feel what's happening, right? So typically entities will be hooking into you and invading your boundaries, manipulating you, coercing you, um, in a way, in sort of the quantum realm, in the psychic field, in the spirit realm, right? And they they won't even know that they're doing it because again, the unhealed parts of their body, the core wounds, and really what's happening is all of that manipulation, all of that pain it's coming from a source of pain. It's coming from a pain and it's trying to resolve that pain, right? In a way, but it's trying to resolve that pain through the victim consciousness. So the dark energy and the dark being is trying to resolve that pain whilst being in a victim consciousness. So ultimately, what we can say is that dark energy and entity beings, whenever their pain, whenever the trauma is brought up, that will activate. That will activate. Like, think about a narcissist. A narcissist is probably really, really charming and magnetic until you cross them or you have some type of conflict with them, and then they probably turn really, really dark. They turn really, really dark. Or they get triggered in some way that activates kind of that core trauma. And then they turn like they change, they switch. They turn into a really malicious, hurtful, resentful, really cutting, dark human being, right? That's like, what's going. And so that's because the pain was elicited. And so if you want to think about it like this, dark energy and entities are in a perpetual trauma spiral. The best way to explain a narcissist is someone who lives 24/7 in a trauma spiral, right? So a narcissist is someone who inflates and responds from a sense of unworthiness. So they're in a perpetual 24/7 inflation from pain, right? So they're doing everything they can to avoid the pain. And so dark energy and entity beings are living in a trauma spiral. So when that trauma gets activated, that trauma spiral gets enforced, right? And now what's happening is the dark energy and the entity being is living in a recreation from something in their past, right? Think about what could happen. Say a dark energy entity being, say they had a father who was abusive or who abandoned them, and they have a boyfriend or something that breaks up with them, right? And then that person, that say that woman or that man, becomes really dark, really resentful, tries to hurt the other person, tries to defame and speak poorly and do whatever they can to the other person, right? So now what's happened is that person is living in a recreation projection of something from the past. Because always when we go through a breakup, there's what's happened between the two people, and then there's also the core wounds that get elicited. There's the pain that we haven't dealt with from our past, the childhood origin that gets brought up. But now they're living in a place of a trauma spiral from that childhood pain, from that childhood origin, and they become really cutting, they become really, really malicious. And so if someone, for example, comes from a lot of trauma and then a lot of that trauma is unhealed, they can turn to some version of like a shadow being, a dark entity, a narcissist, whatever you want to call it, in sort of that wake and response. And so I think it's really important to note that dark energy and entity beings don't know that they're in the wrong. If they do know that they're in the wrong, they have too much internal disgust, internal shame, internal aggression, and anger towards themselves that they're not able to contact it. So they actually are living in a state of victim consciousness. So what's really common with dark energy and entity beings is they are victims who now become abusers. And oftentimes they don't even know that they're the abuser. They don't even know because in the unhealed trauma that is unresolved in the body, they're hooking into people, they're invading boundaries, they're manipulating, they're doing whatever they can to survive, right? So it's all coming from a place of survival. They're doing whatever they can to survive so they don't actually have to look at the unworthiness. They don't have to look at the pain. They don't have to look at the hurt. They don't have to look at the abandonment, right? And so this is why dark energy and entity beings, when you really heal your trauma and you move into your karma, the dark energy just goes because your vibration no longer matches with it. But you can really get caught up with dark energy and entities when you're trying to work out a lot of karma, or when you're really, really vulnerable and taking a really, really big leap. So essentially what I mean by that is, say God in spirit is trying to lead you into a place in your life. God in spirit is, Jamie, I'm trying to lead you to your hero story. I'm trying to lead you to your hero image. And so Source and God is trying to speak to me in a certain way. And on the path of trying to manifest what I want and to move into a place where, Jamie, it's safe for you to be the hero of your story in this way. But in the process of trying to move into that embodiment, to move into that integration, to move into that timeline, you're resolving a lot of karma. You're healing a lot of trauma. There's a lot of fear that comes up. Your little boy, your little girl, you get compressed with the stories. All the ancestral energy comes up. That's when dark energy is going to kind of be around. So you're going to notice a lot of spiritual attacks when you're ascending, when you're working out a lot of karma. And what really, really happens is they come as spiritual tests. Are you going to continue to relate through your shadow? Are you going to continue to stay in comfort? Are you going to continue to relate through your trauma? Or are you going to move into a new realm of divine creation? Are you going to move into an unprecedented foreign timeline that you've never been to? And when you really move and you integrate in that timeline, the dark energy starts to fall away. But the dark energy, when we're between dimensions, the dark energy is going to test us, right? I remember when I was about to go to Austin, Texas, there was so much energy and weight in Austin. And ultimately, I went to Austin to work out all this karma. But I remember in like the 6 months leading up to me going to Austin, Texas, my Instagram kept getting hacked, kept getting hacked, kept getting hacked. And I knew it was because I was about to make a huge leap. And it was a necessary leap for me to move into my higher self in the highest timeline. And the entities could feel this big leap that I was about to take. They could feel me beginning to ascend. And so the hacking of my Instagram was all the dark energy, all the entities. So also dark energy and entities, I said they're victims. They're victims who have become abusers. They also are energy vampires, meaning entities in dark energy love light. They love like lots of energy. But what happens is they love light and they love energy when it's not boundaried, when it's not protected. So the feeding ground, it's the whole, like a narcissist empath is the prime example of an entity and a light being, right? So that is literally the feasting ground for an entity, is someone who's so much light, but they're not boundaried and not protected. Maybe they give that light away freely, or that light is a product that they haven't healed the darkness in them. Whatever it might be, someone who's really empathetic, someone who's so giving. So the entities prey off light that is unboundaried. This is why when you're really healing your shadow and you're really healing the darkness inside of you, the entities prey. That's why when you're in a lot of fear, the entities prey, because you're trying to move into a space where you can be in light and hold and be boundaried with that light. And before you are boundaried, the entities are coming, right? They're coming like wolves feeding on carcasses. They're coming. And so this is why entities like feed off really unboundaried empaths or light beings that aren't in touch with their anger, right? So think of like an empath who doesn't have a healthy relationship to their anger. They're ripe and they're exposed for spiritual attacks. So the way that we, what has to happen is we have to integrate our darkness. We have to integrate the trauma that's trying to move through. But you have to build a really, really big relationship to your anger. You have to, so when you really have a healthy relationship to anger, boundaries, and discernment, entities don't fuck with you, right? And this is why, like, when you heal massive volumes of ancestral energy, when you tell your ancestors to go fuck themselves and you purge your ancestors from your body and you no longer live in these unspoken rules to your ancestors, sacred rage comes when we integrate ancestral energy. Now the entities don't have anything on you. So your relationship to entities will be revealed in your relationship to anger and your relationship to boundaries and your relationship to discernment. When you're really, really discerning and you have a really, really healthy relationship to your standards and your value, and you are really careful with your internal and external boundaries, meaning you don't give your energy away, then entities know they can't win, right? So entities might test you, but then they realize they have no power, right? They have no power. And so entities will really feed off of empathetic light beings who don't have any boundaries, who don't have a healthy relationship to anger. This is also why entities will prey off of us when we're ascending, because we're between dimensions, we're between realms of consciousness, we're trying to work out something karmically, right? And um, even if you do have a really healthy relationship to anger, when you really are integrating some massive shit, some trauma, entities will sort of be around, right? They will sort of be around. And entities, and this is what I want to get to now for sort of the rest of the call here, entities will have a lot to do with our trauma, right? They'll have a lot to do with our trauma. So I'm going to explain, like, for example, a really good example of an entity is a pedophile, right? So what often happens with entities, and again, so I've talked a lot about entities and trauma, right? I've talked a lot about entities and trauma and how entities are victims who become abuser. Entities are powerful spiritual beings with strong spiritual gifts who feel they will lose their power if they heal their trauma. But what can happen is we can be inflicted with dark energy, right? So a pedophile is a person or a human who has been taken over by an entity, right? And that's why pedophiles, want to take from children, which is probably the take the innocence from children, which is like a prime example. Children are the embodiment of God, right? And so a pedophile or a sexual abuser, whatever you want to see, is someone who's been taken over by a dark energy, right? By a dark energy being. And so what happens? So let's say we come from sexual abuse or molestation or something, right? And say it came from an uncle, say it came from a grandparent, say it came from a brother, a father, incest, whatever, something like that. Basically, what it means is that that energy is now caught up in our body, right? So what it will mean is that entity and that dark energy will be caught up in the sacral, right? If you come from sexual abuse, you'll have a lot of entity energy in your sacral. So what can happen is the dark energy and the entity being now, as you're out there trying to date and find a partner, you'll find people that want to take from your sacral energy, right? Um, you'll find shadow beings or people with similar trauma that want to take from your life force. They want to take from your life force. And so basically what's happened there, if we come from a pattern of abuse or molestation or whatever it might be, and now we become susceptible to the karma of entities out in the world as we're dating, or it could just be our relationship to the masculine is trying to steal our sacral energy. So what we might notice as we're moving into our power, or we're beginning to move into our light or our creativity or our sexual power, we feel a lot of invasions, right? There's a lot of karma coming up. Men are even just psychically invading our space. And so the reason why this is happening is because we have an entity tied up in our body from the abuse that has gone unhealed, right? And so we might know that we have this abuse, right? And what happens is we might have this disgust, or we might have this fear of moving into our womb. We might have this fear of moving into your sacral center. You're like, oh, like that's too much. It's too overwhelming, right? And so you don't want to go to that area. And so as that goes unhealed, you stay in a pattern of entities that prey off your sacral energy. Entities prey off that sacral energy, and they take from you and they steal from you. And so what you have to do is you have to get the abuser's energy out of your body, right? And so the way that you do that, and I won't really be able to go all the way through it here on a live, but I've done it many times in clients, is you have to separate the entity from the abuser, right? So what happens with abusers like that is they have an entity oftentimes that's caught up in their body. So that's usually where a victim has become the abuser. So people typically who were victims of sexual abuse become abusers who abuse other victims, right? And it's because there's an unhealed entity inside of them, right? And so you have to separate the entity from the abuser and clear. So once you separate the entity from the abuser, right? So say it's the entity and you separate those two energies. Now you have to remove the energy of the abuser from your body. So say it was like molestation from your father. So you have to do a practice, a process I bring people through where you separate the entity from the abuser, and then you have to purge and clear your father's energy from your body. And as you do that, you're able to now clear out your sacral energy. And now that karma is able to heal and integrate. And you're able to move into more of a clean power, a clean vibration with God and source. And now that pattern of, of people trying to steal from your energy or entities or most often what will happen is we'll call in other people who are also people who suffer from abuse or sexual trauma. We'll call in other people who have similar type of trauma like that, who haven't healed it. And what will happen is as you clear that energy from your body, their life source that would fuel them and they would try to take from you, all of a sudden you're too strong. All of a sudden you're too strong, right? So now as you clear that sexual abuse from your sacral or your womb, now what happens is the charge in the karma is gone. The charge in the karma is gone, right? And so all of a sudden, a lot of probably what brought you together with that person is gone. And so what you might notice is all of a sudden that person falls on a different timeline if they haven't healed, right? And because what's happened is your life force energy, because so much of, for example, healing sexual abuse is going to be pain, but it's going to be a healthy integration of anger that you've cleared your sacral and now your sacral is now boundaried. You now have healthy boundaries around your sacral energy. And now you're protected. Now you're protected, right? And so now that you're protected, that entity or that dark being can't take and hook into you the way that they used to, right? They can't take from you. And so all of a sudden, the feeding ground for that entity is gone. It's almost like there's a door and a lock now and they can't get through. They can't get to you in the same way. And if that person's not ready to heal their stuff, then they'll fall onto a different timeline. Essentially, what will happen is they'll stay in karma. They'll stay in karma and you'll ascend. You'll move into a whole different vibration. And now the energetic match doesn't vibrate anymore. This is why so much what happens, it's like what happens with twin flames. Twin flames are trauma bonds in the spirit realm. Typically, with twin flames, you're trying to work out some type of karma. You're trying to work out some type of karma, right? And you have a contract together. And what you'll notice is you really work out that karma, they all of a sudden are no longer on your timeline. They're no longer on your timeline, right? And so, going back to that with the abuse, right? So entities are going to be so related to what our trauma is. So I'll give you another example. So the example that I gave you with an entity being with sexual trauma, molestation, abuse, like the best example of like is like a pedophile of like dark energy or someone like that, right? So entities is often victims who have become the abuser. And oftentimes entities don't even know they are the abuser. It might be happening in the unconscious space. It might be happening in the psychic realm. The experience where someone talks about that they feel someone invading their space telepathically. Like that's what dark energy does. That's what entities are doing. So essentially what's happening is their unworthiness and their core wounds, rather than feeling the pain of abandonment, heartbreak, grief, anger, whatever it might be, they hook in. So it's an act of survival and self-preservation, right? So a lot of time, dark energy and entities will really try to permeate and manipulate your space in sort of a psychic realm, telepathically, right? And they'll do so until you get strong enough. And then you'll get strong enough and they won't have any power anymore. And they won't have any power anymore. So entities in um, dark energy and entities are trying to pull you into certain vibration. They're trying to pull you into certain vibration. And so what you'll notice a lot, you guys, in the world right now, is there is a lot of karma trying to be resolved. There's a lot of karma that's trying to be resolved. And so you'll notice a lot of people will be ascending and a lot of people won't be able to. A lot of people um, a lot of people will leave the spiritual self-development space. They'll be like, it's too much. And what essentially that means is they're not able to heal their stuff in order to be a practitioner and a facilitator in this new vibration that is evolving in consciousness. So they'll leave the space or they'll hammer down on their karma, right? So there's a big invitation right now that's happening. And entities in dark energy are going to be tests and leeches and vampires and vultures and wolves that are trying to test your integration, test your boundaries, um, and they're trying to test where you're at in your karma. They're trying to test where you're at in your karma. Because when you really begin to move onto God's highest timeline and you really are ascending, and that realm of consciousness is really grounding and earthing for you, entities just won't be around. This is why you'll notice like certain people just fall off your wavelength, right? They fall off your wavelength. They're nowhere to be found anymore. And maybe, and you might also notice like a partial entity, right? Like some people can be partial entities. Like they have the propensity to be an entity, but they're not always. Like, for example, a pedophile would be like a full-blown fucking entity, right? But there's some people who maybe oscillate between light and dark, but they get pulled back into that darkness inside of them. And so much of like entities is about them and their relationship to their karma. They might be really, really good people, but they get pulled back into the patterns of darkness because the pain is too much to look at. And in this new earth and this new vibration that's being created, even the process for entities in themselves is, can they heal that origin and that trauma to move more into the light? And if they don't, they're going to begin to fall off. I have this idea where they kind of become energetic zombies, right? Where the earth moves into a new vibration and they kind of just stay recreating these patterns. And a lot of what's happening globally is like entity and unhealed trauma energy that is kind of continuing to implode and implode, and it's not able to move into this vibration. And so it stays here. And so entities are the same thing. Entities are trying to pull you into a certain way of relating. That's why, like, when you start to communicate through God consciousness and you're like move into this connection of the higher spirit so strongly, entities, they fall off because they're like, they, they just get deep down in the body and the unconscious, they get repelled by that energy because they know they can't hook in anymore. Robin W says, really need to learn this. I have so many people I work with that have childhood sexual abuse in their history. It's like they get stuck. I'm seeing this around me, people quitting their transformation. Yeah, you're going to be seeing it a lot right now. I mean, I'm even seeing it a lot of people online that were in my space that all of a sudden you see them and they're doing something completely different. You're like, what happened? And I even noticed it a lot around in the couple years after the pandemic, right? Like 2021, 2022, a lot of people I knew left the space because they weren't able to heal what was being brought and elicited inside of them, and the world and the earth was expanding its consciousness and they weren't able to evolve with it. In the book that I'm writing, I kind of use the term energetic zombies, where when people live in sort of the recreation, we become energetic zombies, and the new earth is going to be created by people that can move into this awakening that is coming. And so entities and dark energy is the prime example of like vultures and wolves, energetic vultures, wolves, vampires that aren't able to ascend. So the reason why the dark energy preys on light and why you have spiritual attacks is because the dark energy is not able to ascend. They want to pull you into their vibration. They want to pull you into their vibration because their trauma or their pain is too much, or they're not ready, or they have too much anger over their past, or they don't want to forgive their past. They don't want to resolve their past. They don't want to feel somatically what they need to feel to heal this. And so they try to pull people into a certain vibrational way of relating. And when you really heal your karma, all of a sudden the entities go away. And so when you really start to resolve your karma, all of a sudden your aura and your energetic orbit and your energetic field is going to be so strong and expansive that you won't be able to be penetrated by entities. Maybe a little bit, maybe when you're sleeping, maybe when you're moving through some big trauma, but it won't be like, they won't have much power. You know what I mean? You won't, like, I remember I had so many spiritual attacks a few years ago. I still experience entities, but like the light inside of me is too strong for me to be really attacked. Like I still am, but they're not able to do much. They're not able to do much. Whereas a few years ago, the level of karma that I was going through was so strong. And I've still, me, myself, healing, trying to figure my shit out, working through my own karma. But I'm more at like the periphery. I'm more at the periphery layers of that karma. And so, like I said, that when we're healing our karma, um, the entities are really, really strong. And so the deeper karma that we're enthralled in, the deeper the karma that we're trying to resolve, the more the entities will come into play, right? So you should know that when you do have a lot of entities in your space, it probably means you're working out a lot of karma. And so we have to have the resolve to be able to see it through, to be able to be discerning enough. Okay, this person's an entity or a dark energy. And we start to see it, right? Even though they might be invading our space, we feel it and it's gross and it's icky, right? But it means that we're healing something really, really big. And once what we're healing begins to be freed up and be resolved in our body, and as it begins to be freed up and integrate in our body, now the dark energy will not be able to attack us. But like, for example, me a couple of years ago, I was so deep in this karma that I was trying to work out that entities were just everywhere. It's like vultures were perched all around, right? And then as you start to heal more and more and more, and you get a little bit to more of the periphery layers, and you've gone through some of the major stuff, the attacks aren't as strong. They don't have as much power. And so I see entities and dark energies being so prevalent in moving to the new earth and where we're going. And I see so many entities and dark energy just in the world, in people in positions of power all over the place, that we're trying to resolve against. Robin W says, when they try to pull me into it, becomes another test of my direction. 100%. Like it, Robin, it's all about your, can you take the leap? Are you willing to fully walk through the door? Again, the entities in the dark energy will test you. Are you ready to go all the way? And when you really get on that path, and when you really start to like, okay, I get it, I get it, I get it, I get it, just the dark energy just falls away. And you start to move into a whole new realm, a whole new vibration. But as you're trying to resolve the karma and figure it out and solidify the path and solidify the knowing, the entities will test you. And so the entities do become karmic tests. They do become karmic tests. Robin W. is a practitioner. When they try to come into my space, it is asking me to get more clear with my boundaries and say no more. 100%, right? Like I said, the entities will always try to attack people that have a lot of light, people that have a lot of power, because the entities essentially, think about it. It's like the entity wants what we have, right? And They want what we have, but they're not able to engage in their own process to get to the place that maybe that we've gotten to or what we're embodying. So they're powerful beings, but they're more so powerful beings through elements of their shadow. They haven't healed some of their deepest aspects. And so they see our vibration and they're like, like that's what they want. But they're too stuck in some form of victim consciousness. They're stuck in their trauma story. They're stuck in the story of their past. Again, so much of the entities can't let go of. I remember a few years ago when I was this woman I knew ended up being an entity, and she just kept talking about her trauma, her trauma, her trauma, her trauma, and she was insanely powerful, but she lived in darkness and lived in. She needed her trauma. She actually found value through her trauma, and so actually healing her trauma, she felt that she wouldn't have purpose or meaning, right? So sometimes what happens is people want the pity or they want the empathy or whatever they want the attention, right? So sometimes this woman, her trauma, she actually used it as a way to get attention. She actually used it as a way to try and to try to have some type of identity. And so she felt if she actually healed her trauma, she wouldn't have an identity. And so living in pain became her identity. Living in pain became her identity. And I remember saying to her, "You need more joy." And it was so triggering for her. I was like, "You just live in this victim of your trauma, and you just need to be in joy. You need to stop doing all this shadow work, and you need to like do things that bring you joy." And it was so like she was so confronting for her, and I could tell she was one of those people who you would call like a partial entity, that she had good in her, you know what I mean? She wasn't this like dark malicious person, and so much of her entity-ness came from like survival and being feeling so alone and feeling so abandoned and so much trauma that just didn't feel safe to move through her body. And so she lived in this trauma story. And so a lot of times what happens with entities is they actually find their worth through their trauma. For example, I'll tell you guys this. What can happen? What can happen? Say someone comes from sexual abuse and sexual trauma. This is a really, really important thing too. Say someone comes from sexual abuse and sexual trauma. What actually happens is the trauma actually creates an overactivation. So you know how we talk about chakras, right? The way I use karma and trauma for the chakras is an underactivation or an overactivation. If we come from sexual abuse or molestation, typically what we'll have a lot of times is an overactivation of trauma in the sacral center. So this is why, um, a lot of people will engage in promiscuous sexual behavior, addiction to porn, sex addiction, um, not be able to control our bodily impulses, will invade other people's space, will become a sexual abuser ourselves, um, will feel a lot of unhealthy activation of the sacral center. So when we come from an unhealed pattern of sexual abuse, we're probably going to be really activated by things that predicate off of our low value, our lack of self-worth, our boundary invasion, our internal disgust. So we actually get turned on probably by things that abandon us. We get turned on by our own sort of disgust. And the entity probably will prey off the disgust of us. So when we feel disgusted, that will probably turn the entity on. That's like a entity to entity. That's um, like a sexual abuse pattern, right? And so now with an overactivation in the sacral center, we don't have a healthy connection to the sacral center, because we want to think about being in a healthy integration, which is in the middle. It's not an underactivation, it's not an overactivation, it's a healthy activation. If we have an overactivation, it might mean that we have a lot of sexual energy, we have a lot of turn on, we have a lot of eros, but it's not used in a healthy way. We use it to manipulate, we use it to coerce, we use it for validation, we use it for approval. It's not a healthy integration of eros energy, right? And so, where was I going with this? So it's not a healthy integration of the activation of it. And so what happens is we now have this fear that if I heal my sexual trauma, I won't have the sexual power. I won't, and sexual energy is like life force energy, right? But when we have an overactivation of it, we use this life force energy in manipulative ways of the ego, ways of approval, validation. We also use it in ways that predicate off our own shame, our own disgust, our own unworthiness, our own whatever it might be. And if we actually were to heal that sexual trauma, we feel that we will lose the activation of our eros energy. And so this is oftentimes why people will hold on to sexual trauma, like because they have this gift, their trauma, because when you do come from the sexual trauma and abuse, it does produce a lot more sexual energy. So typically people who have been abused will often have a lot of sexual energy, but it's not used in a healthy way. And so if they heal that, they feel they'll lose that. So they'll feel they'll lose something. They feel they were, well, it was horrible what they experienced. The offhand is they have this power, this eros energy. And if they heal it, they feel they'll lose that power. But what actually will happen is they don't lose it, but they just learn to use it in a healthy way. They learn to use it through connection with God. And so this is often why people will hold on to sexual abuse, hold on to sexual trauma in the womb or in their cock or whatever, because they feel they'll lose the overactivation and they'll move into a healthy integration and a healthy activation, right? And they feel they're gonna lose just like what they were given from that really difficult situation, because oftentimes our trauma produces our gifts, right? So sexual trauma produces, you have a gift of a real activation of sexual energy, but you need to learn to harness that in a powerful, good way. And then when you can do that, you have all this power. Because if you think about trauma, what trauma is stuck energy. So when you have a lot of sexual trauma, you have a lot of stuck energy in the womb, or a lot of stuck energy in the cock or the groin or the pelvis or whatever it might be. And when you're in patterns of overactivation, there's a lot of energy there, but it can't move. It can't move, and it's born through shadow. It moves through shadow. And so when that energy moves, now you can move and use that energy through your whole body to create. And now that energy can be washed through God and spirit. And now you can use that energy for good. And now the trauma that you went through, it produced this gift of sexual energy that now can be a superpower rather than your kryptonite, rather than the thing that keeps you in these patterns of stagnation and abuse and trauma. And now you can use it for the activation and creation of what you're trying. And so much of entities and stuff, we get tied to an identity around the trauma and a fear if we lose the trauma, then we lose the power. So hopefully that all made sense. Robin W. says, it hones my discernment and clarity. The entity wants what we have, but doesn't want to do the work. It wants the frequency. Wow, this lands so much. So people who are stuck in victim consciousness are often harboring an entity. Is that it? I would say people stuck in victim consciousness who come from really big trauma. I'd say people stuck in victim conscious, because I would say entities and dark beings, the origin and the source of it is really, really dark trauma, really big trauma, like big T trauma, right? So people who have really dark, really big trauma, who are in patterns of victim consciousness, open themselves up to the possibility of being a dark being or an entity 100%. So I think it really depends on the severity and level of trauma that we experience combined with victim consciousness. Um, Robin W. Is it also the trade they made? This is getting into it, but I have to feel the clients that have had these experiences of abuse are still holding on to the approval or approximation of love from their abuser. Totally, totally, right? They're I mean, ultimately, like they're trying to win the approval and validation still, and letting go of it, right? Because like so much of like if we think about if we have abuse from when we were really young, that becomes a pattern for connection, right? That becomes an imprint for connection. When we're really young, before our brain's still forming, our neural pathways are still being created. When we experience sexual abuse when we're really, really young, that becomes a pattern and imprint for a conditional exchange of love, intimacy, and connection, right? It becomes a conditional exchange, and so a lot of the the imprints become sort of fostered from that imprint in some way or another, maybe sexually or maybe just romantically and in conditions of intimacy, whatever it might be. But ultimately, right, we are trying to um, because we feel that we've done something wrong. We're in some disempowering form of self-disgust that we've done something wrong. So we're trying to win back the approval, win the love, or to obtain the love and approval of the abuser. Totally, totally. That's totally what happens. And rather than being able to see it more clearly for what it is, and being able to um, feel the anger in a healthy way, right? And sometimes, a lot of times, that anger becomes displaced. Um, but totally, that's totally on point what you're saying there, Robin. So interesting that you're experiencing a lot of this um, in your practice. I presume working with women um, who go through this, and so much of like, because if you think about moving into the divine and moving into like a God frequency, um, our sacral center is the engine that fuels us. It's the life force center, right? So much of what keeps us in karma is if we're holding all this trauma in our womb, then we're going to continue to stay in karmic patterns of recreation. And so when we really clear the womb, or we clear the genital area, then we're able to be in a healthier, cleaner, pure power, right? And so um, clearing that area allows us to access all the energy we're capable of, but be able to move forward in a way where we're creating something new and we're moving into like a healthier imprint um, of that power. So that's where healing things like sexual abuse is so paramount. It's so paramount, and I would say um, there's a lot of entity energy enthralled with sexual trauma. A lot of entities and dark beings enthralled with sexual trauma. That's probably one of the biggest for sure. Um, People who come from sexual trauma and haven't been able to heal that, haven't been able to look at it, and and are really like responding and moving more into like manipulation from and entanglement and sticking cords into people from that trauma and from that abuse. I'm getting so many more of those people in my space lately. Huh. Interesting. Well, oftentimes we get people in our space with things that we're also moving through and what we're trying to work out that have experienced that type of abuse. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. You're getting a lot of those people, but yeah, like a lot of times we get people into our space, whilst not always literally, that are always we're working through things together in our own way. But that's interesting. You have a lot of people that are coming into your space who are moving through that. So this was obviously very, very topical, very timely for what you're having in your space. And so um, I know they're in good hands working with you, Robin, and hopefully there are some things in here that might be helpful to bring into the space as you work with these clients so much more, because um, I've worked with a lot of sexual trauma victims as well, and it's when they begin to clear and heal that trauma, it's like so fucking potently powerful, um, because they're such powerful people, such powerful beings, that when this trauma begins to move, it's like holy fuck, they become unstoppable. So can't wait to see that happen, Robin. So Yeah, Robin, if you have any more questions or anything, feel free to reach out via email or Instagram. So I'm going to leave it there, guys, because this is an hour and 20 minutes. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning into this live on entities and ascension. If you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend, share it with an entity, send it to them, and just send it to them. You might think they're an entity and they don't know they're an entity, and just share it with them and just be really passive aggressive. And thanks, Jamie. Appreciate these transmissions so much. You're so welcome, Robin. I enjoy doing these. I appreciate you and anyone else who showed up. It means a lot to have people come to these and get value from them. And so, yeah, thank you as well. Okay, much love, everyone. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week.